tonight we're not just telling a story, we're stepping through time. Close your eyes for a second and imagine it. The warm Mediterranean breeze brushing your skin, the scent of wood smoke mingling with something sharp, spices maybe. Fresh bread in the air, yes, but also something a little more human. You're standing on uneven cobblestones, surrounded by the clamor of a city alive with unfamiliar voices, creaking cartwheels, and the occasional bray of a stubborn donkey. But this isn't just any ancient city. This is Rome, a place of towering marble and brutal ambition, a place where glory was everything, but life. Life could be painfully cheap. And justice? Well, justice came with a blade's edge. Chances are, your modern worldview won't leave this trip unscathed. But that's part of the thrill, isn't it? We're not here for comfort. We're here to peer into the shadows, to find stories most people have long forgotten. Before we dive in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, only if you're enjoying these midnight excursions. It helps the channel more than you know. And drop a comment below. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this little storytelling circle stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that soft, ancient breeze. Let's begin. You feel it before you see it. The balmy breath of the Mediterranean dusk, tinged with smoke, sweat, and spice. There's baking bread, yes, but also a sharper tang, maybe animals, maybe sewage, or maybe just history itself clawing up from the cracks between the stones. The street beneath your feet is cobbled and worn, your boots catching on the ancient grooves as you stagger into the past. Voices rise and collide in a language you almost recognize. Carts rattle, merchants cry, a donkey brays with tragic conviction. You've arrived. Not just anywhere, but in Rome. Gritty, glorious, terrifying Rome. Towering marble columns catch the light like godly spears, but below the grandeur there's grime. Civilization with a dagger in its boot. And you, dear time traveler, are an observer in a world where justice isn't slow or deliberative. It's efficient, ruthless, and occasionally poetic in the most horrifying way. Make yourself at home, though that might be generous. Don't expect your modern ideals to survive the evening. But before we plunge into the darker crevices, if you like these eerie detours through history, let the unseen algorithm gods know. And maybe whisper where in the world you're listening from, because somehow it's comforting to imagine distant souls peering into the same shadows. Ready? Dim your lights. Let the hum of the modern world fall away. Step forward. You're standing in a metropolis that breathes with ambition and bleeds order. Statues loom. Officials glide past in stiff tunics, flanked by armed attendants, the lictors, clutching bundles of rods tied around an axe, the fasces. You don't need to Google it, the symbolism is simple. Rods mean beatings, axe means death, and both are state-sponsored. Rome's not subtle, it doesn't need to be. As you move through the chaos of the streets, past slaves hauling water, vendors shouting over one another, chickens staging coups underfoot, you begin to feel it. The rules, invisible but everywhere. The wrong look, the wrong move, the wrong word, and you're in trouble, big trouble. We begin where it all started, the foundation of Roman law, the 12 tables. Around 450 BCE, a commission supposedly traveled to Greece to study their laws. They came back and, Rome being Rome, decided to carve theirs into bronze and display them in the Forum. Equal justice, at least in theory. In practice, harsh. Think less legal debate and more don't mess up or else. Property disputes, family rights, inheritance, and punishment. Always punishment. Take theft, caught stealing by night. You could be killed on the spot. By day, beaten and surrendered to your victim. Hope they're feeling merciful. The laws weren't nuanced. They were weapons, designed to be seen, feared, and followed. You see that fear in the streets, in the way people step aside for a magistrate, avoid eye contact with soldiers. The very air seems tight with tension. The 12 tables weren't just legal documents. They were declarations. Order comes first. And the state comes armed. Now some scholars argue that not every barbaric clause in the 12 tables was enforced literally. Maybe the harsher bits were scare tactics. Maybe, but Rome liked spectacle, and nothing scares quite like a brutal example made public. Take ostentatio, slandering someone through song. Think of it as ancient Rome's version of a viral diss track. The punishment? Clubbing. To death. No copyright claim, no takedown notice. Just the blunt end of a very real stick. The message was clear. Speech had weight, and Rome had no time for satire with bite. As you continue through the alleys, the marketplace, the open plazas echoing with commerce and command, you feel the presence of the law like a second shadow. And at the center of this swirling chaos, the Forum. Where laws lived, justice was performed, and sentences executed. Forget Netflix. The courts were live theater, real drama, real consequences. Trials were public, executions even more so. You half expect someone to be hawking snacks, roasted dormice. Get your fresh dormice before the beheading. It's all designed to impress, to frighten, to remind every Roman where they stood in the hierarchy and what happens when you fall. But justice wasn't always about fairness. It was about order, social order, state power, family hierarchy. And when those were threatened, punishment went from harsh to inventive. You feel the sun shift, shadows lengthen. Somewhere nearby, the crowd quiets. Something's about to happen. A procession. You're drawn toward the river to the Tiber, where a hush falls like a shroud. People gather in anticipation, not with joy, but a dreadful curiosity. A man is being led by guards, his face drained of hope. Then you see it, the sack. It's large, leather, ominous. And it's not empty. This, you realize, is poena cullei, the punishment of the sack, reserved for one specific crime, parricide. The murder of a parent, most often a father, but sometimes extended to other close relatives. It's a crime so unnatural, so taboo in Roman eyes, that a simple execution wouldn't do. No, this punishment is ceremonial horror. Inside the sack, animals, not random ones, symbolic ones. A dog, a rooster, a viper, and yes, an ape. The meanings, theories vary. The dog, a symbol of loyalty now twisted. The rooster, vigilance. The viper, treachery. And the ape, perhaps a grotesque reflection of humanity lost. A mockery of the killer's own form. Once sewn into the sack with this snarling entourage, the condemned is taken to the water's edge. No final words. No ceremony, just fear. Biting, hissing, clawing fear. And then the splash, oblivion. The river claims them all, human and beast. No grave, no marker, just a tale whispered and retold. A deterrent as potent as any law, but there's more. Oh, there's always more. The sack, grim as it is, was merely one chapter in Rome's book of punishments. Some were quicker, some far slower. And the next page, that leads us up a dusty hill, away from the water, toward something even more infamous. Crucifixion. The slope rises gently, dust swirling underfoot, and the city falls away behind you. The noise, the life, the crowd, it fades into the background hum of distant chaos. Ahead, there's a different sound. A silence broken only by groans. Wind, the faint rattle of iron against wood. You crest the hill, and there they are, crosses, dozens of them. Rough-hewn timbers silhouetted against the sun. On each a body hangs, twisted and broken by pain. This isn't a battlefield. It's a billboard, a message in blood and bone carved into the horizon. Don't defy Rome. Crucifixion. The Romans didn't invent it, but they made it theirs. The Persians might have pioneered it. The Carthaginians and Greeks refined it. But the Romans turned it into policy, into theater, into a grotesque ritual of dominance. It wasn't for citizens, not usually. No, the cross was for slaves, for foreigners, for rebels, pirates, and the disposable. It was the supreme penalty, the summa supplicium. A death so slow, so public, so agonizing, it could erase your name and burn your fate into the memory of the city. You approach. The stench hits first, a mix of blood, sweat, excrement, infection, and fear. Then the sound, groans, gasps, the labored wheezing of men trying to breathe. They're not tied neatly. No comfort here. Their arms are outstretched, often nailed at the wrists, not the palms, despite later artistic liberties. The wrists can hold weight, barely. Feet too, sometimes nailed together, sometimes nailed separately. The pain is unimaginable, but it's the breathing that kills you. To inhale, the condemned must push up on nailed feet or pull with nailed wrists just enough to open the chest. Then they collapse, again and again. Each breath a scream, each hour a lifetime. Blood loss isn't what kills, it's exhaustion, suffocation, shock, time. And time on the cross is the cruelest executioner. Some survive for hours, others days. The lucky ones die during the scourging, the prelude to crucifixion. That ritual is its own torment. The flagrum, a whip with leather thongs studded with bone or metal, flays the back open. It's not a beating, it's an unmaking. Flesh turned to pulp, ribs exposed, muscle hanging like torn parchment. Then they're made to carry their crossbeam, the patibulum, through the jeering crowds. Weakened, half-dead, stripped of clothing and dignity, stumbling toward death while people watch, laugh, throw things. Rome loved a show, and crucifixion was the ultimate production. Think Spartacus. After the slave rebellion fell, Rome crucified over 6,000 survivors along the Appian Way, a mile after mile of writhing agony. You can't walk that road without hearing the echoes, the moans, the flies, the crows. And when death finally comes, sometimes it's mercy. A Roman soldier might break the victim's legs with an iron bar, a crurifragum shattering bones so they can't push up to breathe. Death comes quickly after that, swift by comparison. Or maybe they're left there, days, weeks, left to rot, to be picked at by birds, torn by dogs, denied burial, a horror in Roman belief, where a proper send-off was necessary for peace in the afterlife. Crucifixion was punishment beyond death, a posthumous mutilation of the soul. You glance toward a group of soldiers playing dice at the foot of a cross. One drinks from a skin of cheap sour wine, Pascha. Maybe he offers some to a dying man. Maybe to taunt. Maybe in pity, who knows? Roman soldiers were efficient, not sentimental. Some victims were offered myrrh in wine, a mild sedative, but not always. Often they were kept conscious. Because that was the point, suffering visible to all. A warning nailed into the skyline. And yet, as grim as it is, crucifixion wasn't the only stage act in Rome's brutal repertoire. The hill fades behind you, the wind shifts, and now there's cheering. Not the feverish cruelty of a crucifixion crowd, something bigger, louder. This is roaring applause, a festival. You're in the arena, but you're not in the stands, not this time. You're standing on the blood-streaked sand. This isn't a show you came to watch. It's one you've been drafted into. Welcome to damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. The roar grows louder. You glance toward the heavy gates. They're opening. You're about to meet your co-stars. In this scene, you're not a warrior, not a gladiator. You've been convicted, maybe of treason, maybe theft, maybe just being inconvenient to someone important. Doesn't really matter. You're here now, and the audience is hungry for violence. This wasn't just an execution. It was entertainment, a midday palate cleanser between animal fights and gladiatorial bouts, a reminder that Rome could make death a spectacle, and that some lives were barely worth the sand they bled on. The condemned were often tied to stakes, unable to run, sometimes given fake weapons, wooden swords, dull spears, enough to make it amusing. They weren't expected to win, just to last long enough to be interesting. The beasts, imported from across the empire, lions from Africa, leopards, bears, wild boars, even crocodiles if the arena could be flooded. Rome's appetite for exotic violence was insatiable, and the ecological cost, catastrophic. Whole species decimated to feed the games. The gate crashes open. A lion bounds out. It sees you. And in that instant, you feel the primal terror your ancestors carried in their bones, the fear of claws, of teeth, of being prey. You run. There's nowhere to go. The walls are too high. The sand gives way beneath your feet. The crowd roars. You slip. The beast is on you. Sometimes the animals killed quickly. Other times they toyed with victims, tearing slowly. Bestiarii animal handlers might direct the attack, prodding the beast to keep the pacing right. It wasn't just death. It was dramaturgy. dying on cue for the crowd. When it's over, attendants in costume enter dressed as Mercury, the psychopomp, or Karen, the ferryman. They prod the corpse with hot irons to check for life. If any lingers, they finish it. The body's dragged out with hooks. The sand is raked, the blood swept away, the stage reset. Next act. Sometimes they added flair. An arsonist might be dressed in pitch-soaked clothing and set ablaze before the beasts were released. A mythological reenactment, perhaps. Orpheus being torn apart, but for real. Ancient performance art with a body count. The cruelty wasn't random. It was curated. A grim fun fact. Some condemned prisoners were leased by the state to private event organizers. Like party rentals, but with death. Governors made money. Promoters got blood. The crowd got lunch and a show. You look at the sand, wet with gore, and realize that for all Rome's roads, aqueducts, and literature, this was part of its foundation too. Pain, fear, control through spectacle, but if you survived the arena, if you didn't die fast enough, they had a backup plan. Some were sent to the ludus, the gladiator school, not as trained stars, but as the damnati ad ludum, the condemned to fight. Another lottery, this one with swords, but we'll get there. For now, the lion turns, its muzzle stained red, and the gate closes behind it. And somewhere in the crowd, someone is already reaching for the next ticket. The arena still echoes with bloodlust, but the script has shifted. No longer is it the helpless condemned against snarling beasts. Now it's something else, still violent, still terminal, but with a strange twist of pageantry. You're still on the sand, but this time the people entering alongside you are armed. Not heroes, not champions. These are the damnati ad ludum, criminals sentenced not to immediate death but to fight for it. To earn the slim, mocking possibility of survival through combat. Not for glory, not for honor, just for spectacle. They're given weapons. Sometimes, a short sword maybe, a net, a shield if they're lucky. They're not trained like professional gladiators. They're not prized investments. They're grist for the games. Imagine the pitch. Fight your fellow prisoner to death. Maybe you win. Maybe you die. Either way, the crowd gets a show. This isn't Gladiator the movie. There's no Maximus. There's no uplifting music. Just men and sometimes women, exhausted, terrified, desperate, not trained warriors, but walking execution sentences with pointy props. They're herded into the ludus, the gladiatorial school. Less an academy, more a slaughterhouse with choreography. The Lannister runs the place, a former gladiator or a businessman of low birth but high cruelty. He doesn't teach you to win. He teaches you to die with rhythm. Their training, brutal. Their lodging, Spartan. Their future, mostly written in blood. If you're wondering why the state would bother training someone they're just going to kill, the answer is simple. Entertainment value. A sloppy kill is dull. A short fight is boring. The condemned are taught just enough to keep it interesting, to last a few minutes longer before the inevitable. The crowd likes a good struggle. And if one of these damned manages to survive, to win, there's a glimmer, a flicker of something rarer than water in the desert, the chance of a reprieve. It's not guaranteed, it's not even common, but it exists. The wooden sword, Rudy's, is the symbol of freedom. Fight long enough, die slow enough, entertain well enough, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be granted it. Become a free man. A ghost that crawled back into the world of the living. But don't count on it, the crowd is fickle. Mercy is rare, most die horribly. Their fights are chaotic, clumsy, and cruel. Less ballet, more bar fight with consequences. Blood flies, bones crack. And the crowd, oh, the crowd judges. When a man falls, bleeding and broken, the audience becomes jury. A thumb raised or turned, or perhaps a shout. A decision from the editor, the official running the games. Some scholars argue the thumb gestures we think we know might be wrong. Maybe thumbs up meant death. Maybe it meant mercy. The truth is obscured. But the outcome was simple: mercy and you live, death and you don't. And if you think that's arbitrary, you're not wrong. Because for these condemned fighters, life wasn't about justice. It was about utility. If you were entertaining, maybe you got another day. If you weren't, you didn't. Rome had no patience for the uninteresting. And beneath all this, there's an economy, a dirty, cynical business model. Provincial governors sentenced criminals. Event organizers leased them. The state profited. Crowds got their fix. And the damnati bled for it. A perfect little machine of death, oiled by corruption and applause. It wasn't just men who faced this fate. Women, too, could be sentenced to fight. They were rarer, more novelty. But Rome never wasted a good opportunity to stage something shocking. The sand soaks up more blood. The crowd cheers again. Another life ended, another afternoon's entertainment concluded. The survivors, if there are any, are dragged away. Not to rest, just to wait for the next bout. But let's step back from the din of the crowd. Leave the roar behind. There's another form of justice Rome reserved for its citizens. One far older, more primal. You find yourself in a quieter place. A magistrate's court, perhaps, or a forum corner where disputes are settled not with swords but with principles. Brutal ones. This is lex talionis, the law of retaliation. Eye for an eye. Tooth for a tooth. Hurt me and I hurt you the same way. It sounds biblical, it's not. It's Roman, codified in the 12 tables, and practiced at least at one point with stunning literalism. You break a man's bone in a brawl. He demands repayment. You offer money. He declines. He wants your bone broken in return, and he might get it. Literal retaliation wasn't just legally permitted, it was enforced if compensation couldn't be agreed upon. A snapped limb for a snapped limb. No court fees, just symmetry. Roman minimalism at its darkest. It wasn't chaos, it wasn't mob rule. There were procedures, oversight. But make no mistake, if you were sentenced under Talio, it wasn't a metaphor. A magistrate might supervise. The injury carefully administered. This wasn't revenge. It was justice, Roman style, balanced. Cold, impeccably calculated. Eventually, as Roman law matured, fines became more common. Monetary compensation replaced mutilation, partially because money's easier to carry. Partially because it's hard to keep a workforce productive when everyone's missing limbs. But the shadow of Talio lingered, especially for non-citizens, especially when emotions ran high. You see a man kneeling, face pale, arms restrained. Another approaches, perhaps with a club, perhaps with pliers. The sentence is read. The magistrate nods. Justice begins. It's not loud, it's not public theater, it's quieter, intimate. And somehow worse, the pain is real, the screams not for show, and when it's over there's no cheering, just silence. And maybe that's the point, because Rome understood something most states forget. Not all control comes from grand statements. Sometimes it comes from the whisper of bones breaking in a side alley courtroom, from the rumor of pain applied with precision. And just when you think the worst is over, the scene changes again. You're surrounded now by soldiers. Leather armor, short swords, dust-covered faces hardened by campaigns and scars. But this isn't a march. This isn't a battle. This is punishment. The cohort is being punished. And not with drills or docked pay, with decimation. You've heard the word, you've probably used it, but Rome invented it and the original meaning was chillingly literal, removal of 1 in 10. This wasn't metaphor, this was method. A cohort disgraced itself. Mutiny, cowardice, betrayal, and so the commander, cold, unsmiling, orders decimatio. The men are divided into groups of 10. Each group draws lots, and in each group 1 man loses. The remaining 9, they kill him, not cleanly, not with honor, with clubs, stones, bare hands if need be, slowly, brutally. It's not just execution, it's penance and trauma. You don't just lose a friend, you become his executioner. You break his skull, his ribs. You deliver Roman justice not through the state but through yourself. You carry it with you forever. Decimation was rare, too destructive to use often. But when it was invoked, it shattered morale to rebuild it. The survivors were marked, literally and socially, forced to sleep outside the camp, fed barley instead of wheat, ostracized by their comrades, their shame made flesh. And the lesson, failure has a price, one that doesn't care about guilt, only consequence. Rome didn't always need monsters, it could make them. in a single afternoon, with a handful of black stones and a shrug from a general. And when the last stone is thrown, the silence that follows is almost unbearable. The camp falls silent, the ground still slick with the blood of comrades. But there are no more lots to draw, no more clubs to raise, only silence. And in that silence, the scene changes again. You're not on a battlefield anymore. You're not even in a court. You're at the edge of the city, and someone's being pushed out of it. This is exilium, exile. And in Rome, it could be a fate worse than death. It wasn't just removal from a place. It was erasure from society. You see the condemned, maybe a senator who spoke too freely, a poet whose verses offended imperial ears, or a general who lost the wrong battle. Their toga is gone. Their escort is stern. Their face is already hollowed out with the understanding they are no longer Roman. To be exiled was to lose everything. Not just your house or your career, but your identity, your citizenship, your belonging. There were degrees, of course. A mild form, relegatio, barred you from the city or a province. A harsher one, interdictio equi edignes, the denial of fire and water, banned you entirely from Roman territory. No one could legally offer you shelter or sustenance. You became a ghost. An exile was not just banished, they were marked for forgetting. And for a Roman, so tied to civitas, to rights, status, and the heartbeat of the Republic, it was annihilation. A social death sentence. You watch them board a ship. No crowd hurls insults. No whip cracks, just a heavy, leaden silence. The kind reserved for funerals, because that's what this is. A funeral without a corpse. Some exiles, like the poet Ovid, sent to the edges of the Black Sea, lived on in words. But even then, those words were soaked in loneliness, despair, and aching absence. Others vanished completely, buried not under stones but under bureaucratic forgetfulness. Exile was cleaner than crucifixion, less messy than the arena. But for the elite, it cut deeper. It stripped them of everything Rome valued: voice, honor, family, future. And sometimes that silence could kill louder than a lion's roar. But not all punishment came with such tragic dignity. Back in the Forum, under the bright, judgmental sun, humiliation reigned supreme. Welcome to Rome's most underrated tool of justice, public shaming. You see a man being paraded through the streets, chained, wearing a sign around his neck. A petty thief, maybe, or a debtor, or a liar who gave false witness in court. The sign, it names the crime, the crowd. It's doing its job, laughing, jeering, pointing, maybe even throwing something soft and rotten. This is infamia in action, the erosion of reputation. In a society obsessed with honor, honos, shame, ignominia could be a social execution. It wasn't about punishment alone. It was about performance. Another man, a slave, wears the furca, a Y-shaped wooden yoke, forced to carry it through the streets, his arms tied to the arms of the frame. His crime branded into his skin, perhaps literally. Shaming wasn't reserved only for the lowborn. Senators and equestrians could be stripped of titles, insignias, seats in the Senate. And while they weren't paraded like cattle, the effect could be just as crushing. You imagine the whispers, there goes Gaius, used to preside over trials. Now he can't even own property. Some punishments were grotesque art pieces of mockery. A talking donkey statue paraded through town, mocking the liar who stood beside it. Don't be like Sextus, it might say. Sextus lied, now Sextus is an ass. Rome didn't have Twitter, but it had the Forum. And once your reputation was ruined there was no mute button. You look around and see the weight of shame hanging on shoulders like chains. People avert their eyes. Children snicker. Business stalls for the disgraced. Doors close. Sometimes the shame was permanent. Branding stigma marked you forever. A letter burned into your skin. A label you could never scrub clean. Even your descendants might carry the stain. For the Romans, reputation wasn't just ego. It was currency, and losing it meant poverty of the soul and the wallet alike. And yet even that wasn't the bottom. No, the next step down, slavery. You move through the marketplace. There are pens, auction blocks, collars, and people. Some were born slaves captured in wars, raised in bondage. But others were free once, like you. They lost everything through debt or judgment, and now they're for sale. This is nexum, the ancient form of debt bondage. A man defaults, and to repay his creditor he sells himself. Or worse, his child. Slavery was Rome's economic backbone. From latifundia farms to city kitchens, from mines to manuscripts, enslaved people did everything. Every stone of Roman glory was laid with their hands. You see the auctions, bodies inspected like livestock, teeth checked, muscles probed, signs hung around their necks, good for hard labor, skilled cook, no known vices, prone to escape. The lucky ones end up in homes, the unlucky ones, the mines. Ad metallum, condemnation to the mines, was as close to hell as you could get in the Roman world without actually dying. Cramped tunnels, no light, no air, no safety, just endless hacking, hauling, dying. Or maybe it's opus publicum, public works. Digging roads, aqueducts, fortifications. You don't die quickly. You die in pieces, a back here, a lung there, a curious horror. If a slave committed a crime, the master might surrender them to the injured party. Noxal surrender. You get punished, or handed off like a broken tool. And if a free person was sentenced to slavery, they ceased to be a legal person, became res a thing. They could be tortured for testimony, worked to death, punished without appeal. The state might lease them, profit from them, and no one would remember their name. The collar clinks, the chain tightens, and the crowd moves on. Rome didn't build its empire with justice. It built it with order. And sometimes the fastest path to order ran straight through the spine of a man in chains. The chains fall away, but the weight lingers. And in their place comes a quieter kind of punishment, one that doesn't swing a sword or crack a whip, one that doesn't bleed you but slowly drains everything else. You're in an office now, or what passes for one in ancient Rome. Wax tablets, ink-stained fingers, a smell of old bronze and cold sweat. Here, punishment is counted in coin. Fines, confiscations, financial annihilation. A man stands before a magistrate. He is not bleeding, not yet, but he looks gutted, because behind him stands a clerk, and the clerk is making a list, not of sins, of assets, land, livestock, villas, slaves. All of it now belongs to the state. This is publicatio bonorum, the public seizure of goods. And it's as lethal to a Roman identity as any spear. Because here, wealth is not just comfort, it's political capital, social status, sacred inheritance. Lose it and you lose your voice in the Senate, your standing in the streets, your friends, your family's future. You don't need to be executed to be destroyed. You can just be audited by Rome, a mainstream historical fact. These seizures often weren't about justice at all. They were about enrichment, feeding the imperial treasury. Accusations of maesta's treason were a favorite, a loose term that could mean plotting against the emperor or just being rich and annoying. And there were informers, delators, who profited handsomely from such accusations. Snitches didn't get stitches, they got land deeds. It created a culture of paranoia where having too much could be as dangerous as having nothing. You walk past the now former home of a wealthy senator. The paint is still fresh. The garden's still pruned, but it belongs to the state now. And he's vanished, maybe in exile, maybe in a cell, maybe just a name scratched out on a wax tablet. Even civil suits had their price. The sacramentum, an early form of legal wager, required both parties to deposit a sum with the court. The loser forfeited it. Think of it as a lawsuit with chips on the table, and the house always wins. The machinery of Roman financial punishment was well-oiled. Quaestors, procurators, tax farmers, every cog knew its role, and once the gears turned, they didn't stop. One ledger entry at a time, they could take everything. And then there's the final kind of punishment, the sacred kind. You're no longer in the market or the court. You're somewhere quieter, holier, but no less horrifying. You're near the temple of Vesta, and someone is being led away. She is young, dressed in white. Her expression is calm, too calm. She is a Vestal virgin, or was, and she has broken her vow. The punishment? Death. but not by sword. Rome would never spill the blood of one sacred to the gods. No, they'd bury her alive. The crime is incestum, the violation of chastity, a sacred offense, and Rome is very serious about its symbols. She will be placed in a chamber, given bread, oil, water, a lamp. Just enough for the state to say, we didn't kill her. She simply didn't escape. And then the chamber will be sealed. No cries, no audience, just silence. A slow death in sacred stillness. Rome could be many things, pragmatic, brutal, indulgent. But when it came to the divine, it was terrified. Offending the gods was not just a crime, it was a national emergency. And so the punishments for sacrilege were measured, mythic, and merciless. But even this isn't the end. There is one punishment beyond exile, beyond pain, beyond death. Damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. To suffer this was to be unmade. No, not killed, that was too easy, this was worse. Your name chiseled out from inscriptions. Your statues toppled, defaced, repurposed. Your likeness smashed, melted, reused for someone more loyal. Your deeds forgotten. Your family cursed to silence. You became a void, a blank in the ledger of history, an official denial that you had ever existed. And for a Roman obsessed with legacy, with fama, it was the ultimate punishment. Because Rome taught its sons to seek immortality through glory, through memory, through being known, to be forgotten. That was oblivion. You see it on walls, chiseled out faces in marble reliefs, names half removed, gaps in records, some figures erased so thoroughly we only know they existed because of the scars they left behind. And the people, they understood. To remember was dangerous. To speak the condemned's name was an act of defiance, and Rome didn't take kindly to defiance. So the whispers fell silent, the air moved on, and the forgotten became truly so. You stand in the Forum now, looking at the marble columns, the worn stones, the scars in the architecture where once names had been proudly displayed. And suddenly, you feel it all. Not just the whip or the chain, not just the spectacle of violence or the roar of the crowd. You feel the systems, the gears, the silent, grinding logic of a society that prized order above life, that could craft its cruelty with precision, that could kill not just the body but the story. Rome wasn't evil, it was efficient. Its justice system was a theater, a machine, a prophecy. And you, for this brief moment in its history, have seen what lies beneath the marble and myth. As you return to your own world, the air around you feels lighter but your mind heavier. The lion is gone, the cross is empty, the sand has been raked, but the stories remain, and now you carry them. Back in your quiet room with your peaceful bed and your safe, unremarkable night, no sacks, no vipers, no exiles, just the soft whisper of the past saying, Rome remembered justice not as fairness but as control. Sleep well. You earned it. The silence of memory undone lingers in your bones like a chill that refuses to leave. You've seen Rome's justice in its rawest, most theatrical forms. Bloodied sand, public degradation, the ritual burial of a priestess. But not all punishment was administered at the end of a whip or on the swing of an axe. Some of Rome's cruelest tools were more intimate, slower, systemic. You walk once more through the city, but now you begin to notice things you missed before. A man sweeping the street with downcast eyes, wearing not a tunic but the coarse rag of penal labor. His gait is stiff, one leg dragging. You realize his foot is bound in iron. He's not just a laborer, he's ad poenam, condemned. But this is no gladiator, no mind-bound slave. His sentence isn't death. It's a life spent wearing the weight of guilt. These are the perpetui servi publici, permanent public slaves. Criminals too dangerous to trust with freedom but too useful to simply kill. Men and women sentenced not to die for Rome but to be worn down by it. Their world is repetition. Construction, cleaning, building roads, clearing aqueducts, tending stay-toned fields. There is no fight, no hope of release, just the grinding years, the slow rot of the spirit. Invisibility was part of the sentence. No audience, no applause. Only the quiet knowledge that your life has been reduced to output. And if you stop producing, they stop feeding. But even more chilling is the idea that Rome had engineered a punishment that didn't need whips or chains to break a person. It only needed time. Still, not everyone was granted the mercy of hard labor. Some crimes called for artistry. You find yourself near a basilica, watching a peculiar kind of trial. The accused is a man of letters, a philosopher, or at least someone who fancied himself one. His crime? Blasphemia, contemptus religionis, insulting the gods. He did not kill, he did not steal, but he spoke. Words, ideas, too dangerous for marble ears. Rome, for all its tolerance of foreign cults and mystery religions, had limits, and crossing them could mean a punishment carefully designed not just to hurt, but to ridicule. You see the sentence delivered, supplicium ridiculum, the ridiculous punishment. The man is shaved bald. His eyebrows are scorched away, his robe replaced with a woman's dress, and a painted donkey is led beside him, garlanded in flowers. They parade him through the city, children laughing, the crowd pelting him with awful, hurling verses of mockery more cutting than any lash. His crime is treated not as heresy, but absurdity. Rome knew that ridicule could break a man faster than torture, because pain ends, but shame lingers. And while this might seem mild, remember, in a society where dignitas and auctoritas were everything, being laughed at was a social death. A laughingstock could not govern, could not plead in court, could not recover. And if he spoke again, well, then it would no longer be a joke. But it wasn't just individuals Rome punished. Sometimes whole groups suffered, whole cities. You walk now into a town square, not in Rome but in a provincial city. Its forum is eerily quiet, statues toppled, the temple doors sealed, the civic records burned. This is a city that defied Rome, and Rome responded with interdictum municipii, the civic interdict. A citywide punishment, no more legal rights, no more citizenship for its people, its courts shut, its markets dissolved, its sacred rites suspended, its name erased from maps and milestones. It becomes a dead city, still standing but silenced. Rome's justice wasn't only about punishing individuals, it was about warning systems. And if one cog jammed, they didn't just oil it, they melted it down. You turn back to the road, to Rome, to the center. But even at the heart of the empire, justice had levels, gradients. You approach the carcer, Rome's infamous prison near the Capitoline Hill. The Mamertine, it's not large, not sprawling like modern prisons, it's claustrophobic, cold, a place of holding, not correction. Rome didn't imprison to punish. That was inefficient. Prison was for waiting, for judgment, for execution, or for forgetting. You descend into the darkness. A stairway to a cell carved from stone, damp with condensation and history. You imagine the prisoners who have passed through, traitors, captured kings, political enemies, debtors awaiting confiscation. They don't rot from abandonment, they rot because they were meant to. Some were executed in the cell itself, strangled, starved, left to collapse. And even here the architecture whispers its purpose. This is not a place for justice. This is a place for the discarded. You reach the lowest chamber. There's no air, no light. Just the knowledge that if you vanish here, no one will ask where you went. And suddenly, you understand something Rome never wrote down but always lived by. Death was only the final punishment. The real sentence was knowing it was coming, and that no one would stop it. You emerge from the dungeon slowly, blinking against the sun as if waking from a nightmare. But what you step into is no less suffocating, just quieter, cleaner. The wounds inflicted here leave no visible scars, but the damage is deeper. You're no longer at the base of a hill or in the belly of a prison. You're in the corridors of power. Specifically, you're near the Domus Augustana, the imperial palace. It's beautiful, pristine, almost sacred in its order. But within these walls, another kind of justice is practiced. You are entering the world of delatio. Here, fear wears a toga. Rome had always prized law and order, but under the emperors, justice became less about crime, more about loyalty. Less about theft or murder, more about words, about opinions. about what you didn't say or who you dined with. And the instrument of this shift, the informer, delators, they were everywhere. Former slaves, social climbers, even senators, watching, listening, waiting for someone to slip, to whisper a criticism of the emperor, to mock a public policy, to possess a book that ought not be read. And when they heard it, they reported it to the Senate, to the praetorians, to the emperor himself. And then, the trial would come, but not in public, not with crowds and shouting. These were the cognition's secreti, secret trials, held in chambers with no audience, no records, just accusations, silence, and decisions. And the punishment: confiscation, exile, execution, sometimes all three in that order. You watch a man, an old senator, escorted from his domus. He does not resist, he says nothing, because he knows there is no defense. Not really. His crime: he praised a previous emperor, too warmly, too frequently. Now his property will be seized, his sons disinherited, his statues removed. His name, if he's lucky, will remain, but without luster. If he's unlucky, it will be damnatio memoriae all over again. The state didn't need to break every rebel. It only needed to break one in public and make everyone else watch. But the beauty of informers from a government's point of view is that they didn't just punish. They turned everyone else into accomplices. You never knew who was listening. Your brother, your scribe, your client, your own slave. There are cases where household slaves testified against their masters under torture, yes, but with legal backing. Rome wasn't just a city of stone and law. It was a city of ears, and the echo of a single sentence could outlive you. You walk now into a smaller court, a tribunal overseen by an imperial procurator. A man is on trial, not for treason but for a look, an expression he made during a speech. The accusation: obliteratio principes, diminishing the majesty of the emperor, a vague charge, deliberately so. He tries to argue he meant nothing by it, that his face simply looked that way. The judges don't laugh, they nod, and sentence him, banished to the edge of the empire, a place with no baths, no wine, no Latin, just wind and silence. It's not death, but it feels like one. Back outside, you begin to notice the statues again. The dedications, the inscriptions, all glowing with praise, hyperbole on marble. To the divine Caesar, whose wisdom outshines Apollo. To the unconquered Augustus, savior of all mankind. And you realize these aren't honors, they're insurance. Each line carved not to glorify the emperor but to shield the speaker, to prove loyalty, to show the city, the state, the gods that I am not a threat. You feel the walls closing in, not physically but ideologically. Thought becomes performance, silence becomes treason, and law becomes a whisper of obedience. In the Republic, the courts served the Senate. In the Empire, they served the throne. And in that service, truth was optional. Only survival mattered. You wonder how many people lived in Rome and never once spoke their true thoughts aloud. Not to friends, not to spouses, not even to themselves. Because when the state watches everything, when every wall might have ears, justice becomes less a matter of law and more a matter of narrative. And those who control the story, they control the sentence. As you walk through the golden streets lined with polished stone, everything seems orderly, perfect. A gleaming imperial city, but beneath that gleam is a different kind of punishment. Not crucifixion, not exile, but pressure, endless pressure to conform, to smile, to applaud. Even as the rope tightens quietly around your throat, the marble fades behind you. So do the crowds. So does the Latin. You are no longer in Rome. You are in the provinces. And here at the boundaries of the known world, in wind-scoured outposts, in half-civilized towns with more spears than scrolls, Roman justice takes a different shape. Not weaker, not gentler, just leaner, more immediate, more merciless. You're standing on the Via Claudia, a road that stretches past forests, past fields, into the murky distance where Britannia begins to vanish into fog. Behind you is Londinium. Ahead, a fort whose name the maps forget. This is a place where law wears a sword on both hips and carries them both. Roman governors in the provinces held imperium, supreme military and judicial authority. Here the governor is not merely a magistrate. He is the law. He is judge, jury, and when the need arises, executioner. And in this province, justice is pragmatic. A theft in Rome might merit a fine, a beating, or a symbolic punishment. Here, it gets a hand chopped off. Efficient, immediate, irreversible. You arrive in a fortified town just in time for Judgment Day. The locals, a mix of Roman colonists, Latin-speaking administrators, and native tribes under imperial rule, gather in the forum. It's smaller than Rome's, but the tension feels bigger. A man is dragged out. His accent is wrong. His tattoos tribal. He's accused of assaulting a Roman citizen. That's not a crime in Rome. That's a death sentence. The governor, cloaked in his purple-edged toga, doesn't deliberate long. His lictors step forward. The sentence is read in Latin, then badly translated. The man doesn't understand all the words, but he understands the outcome. He begs. The crowd stares. A soldier steps forward with a cudgel. Supplicium ultimum, the ultimate punishment. No appeals. No lawyers, just the crack of wood against bone. You want to look away. But this is what justice looks like here. Swift, brutal, uncomplicated, and often political. Because governors weren't above using the courts to make points. To keep Rome's name feared. To keep the locals docile. A little blood on the stones reminded everyone. This is Roman territory even when the eagles fly far from here. You head inland, toward Gaul, then to the edge of Numidia. Then across the scorched eastern provinces, where border cities crouch beneath the gaze of desert winds. Everywhere you see the same pattern, imported law, indigenous pain. You pass through a village with scorched homes. The crime, unpaid taxes. The punishment, collective. Multi-communes communal fine, but they had no money. So the governor levied their grain, their tools, their daughters. This wasn't rogue behavior. This was policy. Rome didn't always punish people for crimes. Sometimes it punished them for reminding Rome that it needed to be here at all. Then there's the auxiliary soldiers, non-Romans serving in the Roman army, promised land and citizenship in exchange for loyalty. You see them on patrol, their armor lighter, their discipline harsher, their punishments worse, because they weren't citizens. They didn't have protections. For them, desertion was crucifixion without ceremony, stealing rations, 30 lashes and half pay for a year, striking an officer, death by clubbing by your own unit. You speak to one off duty. He doesn't look at you directly. We fight for Rome, he says, but we die for it quicker. On the eastern frontier near Syria, the lines between Rome and not Rome blur. In Palmyra, Roman laws mix with tribal codes. You see hybrid sentences, Roman punishments delivered by local priests, native rituals cloaked in Latin decrees. A smuggler is caught. Instead of jail, they cut off his nose, then brand his forehead, fur, thief. This wasn't official, not in Rome, but here. It's tolerated, encouraged even. Because when governors are sent to the edge of the world, they're given one unspoken instruction: make it quiet, by any means necessary. You hear of prescriptio privata, unofficial lists of names to be eliminated, not published, not carved in stone, just whispered, passed from centurion to centurion, troublemakers, tax resistors, would-be rebels, no trials, no appeals, just midnight, just a knock, just a quiet body rolled into a ditch. This, too, is Roman justice, not written in the 12 tables but practiced in the provinces. You begin to understand something else. Rome didn't spread justice. It exported fear, codified it, branded it, made it modular like a road, like an aqueduct, build it anywhere, adjust for terrain, and always build it to last. But there is something else here too. Beneath the blood, the ash, the silence, you feel it in the muttered curses of old women, in the eyes of men with missing hands, in the empty temples of gods forgotten. Resentment. Rome punishes quickly, but resentment festers slowly. And justice, if it isn't mutual, becomes a kind of heat, a slow burn in the bones. And all fires, even the ones Rome pretends don't exist, eventually rise. You return to Rome, but it feels different now. The streets are still paved, the columns still polished, the statues of emperors still loom over the forum, but something vital has changed. There is an unease under the marble, not just fear but fatigue, not just power but paranoia. You've seen Roman justice when it was confident, brutal, and methodical. Now you're about to see what happens when the system begins to eat itself. The signs are subtle at first. Trials begin to drag longer. Accusations become more outlandish. People speak less and glance more. The laws haven't changed, but their purpose has. Justice, once a tool of control, is now a tool of vengeance. Everyone is suspect. Everyone is listening for the wrong sentence, the wrong metaphor, the wrong silence. You witness the trial of a noblewoman, once beloved in every portico and salon. Her crime: a statue erected in her honor was taller than the one beside it, which happened to bear the likeness of the empress. That's all it took. She is charged with sedidio, inciting public offense against imperial dignity. The evidence? A poet's verse, half remembered, half forged. Her defense lawyer barely speaks. He doesn't want to go down with her. When she's convicted, there is no outrage, no surprise, only the quiet relief of bystanders thinking, at least it wasn't me. The rot spreads through the Senate next. More informers, more trials. Executions that begin at dawn and end by lunch. And still, the people cheer when they are told to, clap when commanded, speak praise while their eyes stay blank. You realize something terrifying. Rome isn't collapsing from rebellion, it's collapsing from too much order. Justice was once a weapon Rome pointed outward. Now it points inward, and it's carving up the city with surgical precision. Then come the purges. Not the loud, public ones of previous emperors, but a quiet, continuous thinning. Wealthy men are summoned to explain their accounts. They leave their villas in silk and come back stripped of title, fortune, and sometimes limbs. One senator, accused of falsifying a census document, is fined into oblivion, stripped of his estates, then reassigned to manage grain shipments in a malaria-ridden swamp. No trial, no defense, just a letter with the imperial seal. Meanwhile, the people suffer. Bread is more expensive, grain shipments slow. The fountains don't run as often, and disease creeps in from the tenements. Crime rises, not because the law is gone, but because it is everywhere, crushing the small and ignoring the strong. The poor are punished for theft with lashes, then branded. The rich are punished for treason with land seizures, then exiled to palatial islands. Equality under law has vanished. It existed once, on bronze tablets. Now it's a hollow echo. You attend a public hearing in the forum. It's meant to be a showcase of Roman fairness, a dispute between a merchant and a ship captain over lost goods. But as the arguments unfold, you notice something else happening. People are watching not the plaintiff, not the defendant, but the magistrate, watching his every gesture, measuring his expression, because everyone knows this is not about the case. This is about where he stands. If he rules against the wrong man, he may find himself in the next trial. If he rules too quickly, he's suspected of bribery. So he delays, stalls, sends it back for review. The crowd disperses, unsatisfied. The system has made him not just cautious, but useless. Even the soldiers begin to see it. The Praetorians, once Rome's elite guardians, have turned inwards. You hear whispers in the taverns near the Castra Praetoria of centurions beheaded not for disobedience, but for hesitation, of tribunes arrested because they failed to cheer loudly enough at the emperor's birthday games. No one wants to lead. No one wants to command, because the higher you rise, the longer you have to fall, and Roman justice has become very good at pushing. You pass a shrine to Justitia, the goddess of justice. Her statue is cracked, not shattered, just weathered, half forgotten. No one lays flowers at her feet anymore. No prayers are whispered at her altar. People pray to Mercury now for profit, to Fortuna for luck, to Janus for warning. Justice in this city has become a ghost, revered in rhetoric, feared in practice, absent in reality. And then one morning, you see the first red banners outside the gates. The enemy is not here yet, but everyone knows it's coming. A Germanic warband, a breakaway legion, it doesn't matter. The people look up from their empty bowls, their faded tunics, their shuttered shops, and they do not run. They do not scream. They do not beg for help. They simply watch, because they have already been conquered, not by barbarians, but by their own system, by a version of justice so obsessed with survival that it forgot its purpose, so perfect in its cruelty, so exact in its punishment, that it no longer required rebellion to collapse. It just needed time. Rome once prided itself on its laws, on the 12 tables, on the code of the Republic, on the writings of jurists and the majesty of the courts. But now its justice is a blade with no handle, sharp, precise, and useless to everyone who needs it most. The red banners do come, eventually. So do the swords, the fire, the war cries. Rome burns, not all at once, but slowly, decade by decade, century by century, each wound a little deeper, each repair more fragile than the last. When the city finally falls to foreign boots, it's not the Colosseums or the forums that collapse first. It's the idea of Rome, that myth of order, eternal and immovable, and with it the myth of its justice. But not everything burns. Somewhere, amidst the rubble of libraries and courts, scrolls are preserved, smuggled east, copied by monks, reinterpreted by popes, lawyers, kings. The Roman sense of law, its severity, its obsession with hierarchy, its methods of control, endures. You've seen it already, in the ink of medieval codices, in Napoleonic codes, in civil law textbooks printed last year, in prison systems and punitive taxes and the terrifying resilience of bureaucracy. Rome's greatest punishment wasn't crucifixion or exile or erasure. It was legacy. You walk again through the forum, not in reality but in memory. Statues have crumbled. The Senate is empty. The Temple of Jupiter is a broken echo of thunder, but the stones remember. The roads still run. And the laws, they still whisper in the foundations of modern cities, quietly shaping how we govern and how we punish. You think back to what you saw, the man sewn into a sack with vipers, the crucified slave gasping under his own weight, the prisoner in the mines whose name was never recorded, the senator whose silence was his only crime, and you realize something. Roman justice was never truly about balance, not fairness, not even peace. It was about stability, perception, spectacle. A city that grew too big to be governed by kindness chose control. A people obsessed with legacy learned to make obedience eternal. And when that control finally slipped, when emperors fell, when provinces rebelled, when the barbarians came crashing through the gates, justice didn't die. It adapted, hardened, hid inside cloisters and courtrooms, took off its blood-stained tunic and put on robes, became precedent and policy instead of cudgels and chains. And still, it punishes. Not always visibly, not always justly, but always. You step back from the vision, the echoes of chains fade, the lion sleeps, the sack is still, the cross is empty, the sand raked smooth. Rome is gone, but the rules, some of them never left. You are home now in your own era. The lights hum softly. Your room is quiet, but the silence feels heavier than it used to, because now you understand. Justice isn't just about what is done, it's about what is permitted and what is remembered. Rome remembered its laws in bronze, in stone, in flesh, and now you do too. Maybe that's the real sentence, memory, the kind that doesn't fade with time, the kind that speaks from beneath marble ruins and says plainly, justice was never blind, it just learned where to look. Sleep well. The empire is gone, but you've seen how it worked, and part of you will always live in the shadow of its order. You wake to a sky the color of old iron. The streets of Rome glisten with a thin film of night rain, the stones slick and shining like old bones. You walk them now, no longer a mere witness to the trials and tortures of the empire, but a bearer of its quiet, unspoken laws. The ones no magistrate carves into stone, but which everyone obeys. And as you pass the forum, with its battered colonnades and vacant niches, where statues of long-condemned men once stood, You sense the echoes of a punishment even older than the 12 tables. One carried not by courts or lictors but by gods and omens, and sometimes by the trembling will of the people themselves. Superstitio, the crime of superstition. In Rome, this wasn't a quaint quirk or harmless piety. It was a danger. To worship in secret, to conduct foreign rites, to sacrifice in darkened rooms or in groves the state had not sanctioned, was to risk both your soul and the stability of the city. The Romans were practical about the divine. The gods required placation, yes, but also management. Every prayer, every sacrifice, every festival was carefully scheduled, codified, and overseen by the state's priesthood. Anything beyond that was, by definition, a threat, a rogue spark in a city of timber roofs. And you see it now. A small group, huddled around a brazier in an alley off the Vicus Tuscus. No laurel-crowned priest among them, no authorized scroll of invocations. Just flickering light, muttered chants in a tongue older than Latin, and the iron tang of blood in the air. A cock's throat slit, its lifeblood spattering the stones. An augury, an attempt to see the future. You step closer, unseen, and already you sense how this will end. The penalty for unauthorized divination was severe. Not always death, though it could be. More often, it was property confiscation, exile, sometimes being beaten publicly in the forum with rods as a warning. But for those accused of sacrificing humans, even in rumor, it was execution without trial, not just for the crime, but to stave off the wrath of the gods themselves. Because in Rome, when one man sinned in secret, the whole city might suffer. Flood, plague, defeat. And so it was not merely justice, but self-defense. You recall the Bacchanalian scandal of 186 BCE. How thousands were executed or imprisoned, entire cults disbanded, temples razed to the ground, not for open rebellion, but for meeting in the dark, for pouring libations, for singing songs the Senate did not approve. The Senate's decree was clear: no religious assembly without a praetor's sanction. The punishment was not measured by the crime, but by the fear of contagion. Superstitio spread like plague, and Rome's response was always surgical amputation. You move deeper into the subura, the poor quarter, where the law thins like fog at the edge of dawn. Here, punishments are neither theatrical nor ceremonial. They are improvised, personal, immediate. A thief caught at market might be stripped naked, beaten by the crowd, branded with a mark on his forehead. Fur, or occasionally cal for calumniator, false accuser. The branding iron is heated in a brazier kept ready by the market overseers. You see it done. The hiss of seared flesh, the man's howl rising above the clatter of vendors and bleeding livestock. There is no court for him, no appeal. The crowd is judge. The brand is sentence. His face will carry the verdict longer than any sentence of years. Not far from there, you glimpse another kind of punishment, quieter but no less cruel. A man in rags stands before a taberna's door. The shopkeeper shouts, gestures at a tablet of debts unpaid. The man has no coin. He signs a crude agreement, then surrenders his tunic, even his sandals. Sold into bondage for what would have been, to a senator, the cost of a single meal. Debtors in Rome could be imprisoned, forced into penal labor, or sold outright into slavery if unable to satisfy their creditors. Nexum, the old debt bondage system, was formally abolished centuries ago, but its specter remained. A poor man's body was still his only collateral. As you leave the subura, passing the flickering shrines of Lares and Penates, you catch the scent of something bitter. Smoke from a funeral pyre, yet oddly acrid. You follow it to a secluded street where a crowd has gathered in uneasy silence. A woman stands atop a crude platform, her hands bound, her hair shorn unevenly. A small fire crackles at her feet. The crime, poisoning. Poisoning in Rome was not simply murder. It was an act of subversion, of cowardice, of secret warfare. The Senate passed countless decrees over centuries, Lex Cornelia de Sicarias et Beneficiis chief among them, to address it. The punishments varied. Wealthy women might be exiled to an island. Slaves were crucified outright. free men condemned to the mines or public execution. But for notorious cases, particularly those involving accusations of mass poisonings, the sentence was pyre burning alive. It sent a message: death could be suffered. But agony witnessed by the city was instructional. You watch as the executioner kindles the fire. No theatrics here. No games, no editor's hand, just raw punishment. The woman's scream rises once, then is drowned by crackling flame. The crowd murmurs prayers to avert evil. Even as they watch, they know the crime was likely rumor, the evidence thin, the sentence inevitable. Fear was the true verdict. And you realize, as you walk the long road back toward the Palatine, that in Rome, justice was not a shield for the innocent. It was a mirror held to the guilty, but the state chose who appeared in the reflection. The gods demanded balance, the Senate demanded control, and the people demanded spectacle. Between those hung the fates of every man, every woman, every child born beneath the imperial eagle. As dusk falls, you pass a wayside shrine where a blind beggar kneels in the dust, his eyes long since taken as punishment for sacrilege. An old penalty, older than the Republic, rarely seen now but still remembered in bone and story. He murmurs a prayer you do not recognize, and you wonder briefly what crime birthed that mutilation. But no one asks, not in Rome. The sentence lingers longer than the sin. And as you climb the hill, the lamps of the city flickering to life below, you understand one final truth. The empire's laws were written in bronze and stone, but its punishments lived in flesh. And while the tablets might crumble, while the statutes might be repealed, the lessons they carved into bodies endured. Justice was not blind in Rome. It was watchful, calculating, and always watching. The dawn creeps over the Palatine in sullen streaks of gray, and you rise with it. Rome stirs early, for the empire is never truly at rest. Grain shipments arrive at the port before the sun clears the horizon, and the city's bread ration must be maintained if riots are to be avoided. But today, the streets hum with a different sort of anticipation. Word has spread that a foreigner, a captured king from some nameless province east of the Euphrates, is to be executed at midday. The execution of royalty, even a dethroned one, is a rarity worth witnessing. And in Rome, death was not merely punishment, it was theater. You find your way to the field of Mars, where executions too grand for the forum are sometimes staged. A temporary wooden platform has been erected, surrounded by soldiers and a thick knot of spectators. Already the hawkers are at work, selling cups of thin wine, fried dormice, and charms against evil omens. Children scramble for a view while the elderly mutter about the decline of the age, though they'll watch as eagerly as the rest. Justice, when rare enough, is an event. The condemned man is brought forward, dressed in what remains of his regal attire. A tattered cloak, a circlet of tarnished bronze. He walks with the bearing of a man accustomed to command, though his eyes have sunk deep into his skull. There are no formal charges read aloud. That was done in the Senate chamber days ago. A list of offenses as long as his lineage, most of them invented, but it scarcely matters. The emperor deemed him a threat. His death is now a ritual, an offering to the gods of order. The executioner approaches, a hoodless figure in plain tunic, carrying a strangling cord. The garrote was favored for highborn criminals. Decapitation was too swift, too clean. The crowd leans forward as the noose is drawn tight, the man's face purpling as he claws uselessly at the cord. His death is not loud, not bloody, but it is slow, measured, public. The lesson writ large. You notice, as the life drains from him, that no one in the watching crowd seems repulsed. Some cheer, others stare, but most simply accept it. Justice is the natural consequence of power in Rome, not moral, not personal, but structural. The king dies not for his crimes, but because his death is useful. And as the body is removed, hurriedly stripped of ornament before being consigned to an unmarked pit, the crowd turns away. There is no mourning, no discussion of innocence or guilt. The fact of death is sufficient. You walk then to the Campus Martius, where another spectacle is rumored to unfold. It is a punishment so rare it is spoken of in low voices, being sewn inside the leather carcass of a dead animal and left to die beneath the midday sun. This was not codified law but a punishment of custom, reserved for those whose crimes offended nature itself, a patricide, temple defilement, sacrilege. The victim this time is a man accused of murdering his own son. True or false, none care. The corpse of a bull lies split upon the earth, its innards steaming in the cool morning air. Soldiers ready the hide, peeling it open, the reek of blood and decay mixing with the scent of crushed laurel. The condemned man is forced inside, limbs twisted, his body crammed into the stinking cavity. The hide is sewn shut, thick sinew drawn tight, sealing him in darkness. He will suffocate or bake, or be eaten by vermin drawn to the carrion's heat. It will not be quick. That is the point. The watching crowd makes the sign against evil as the executioners finish their work. The bundle is dragged to the edge of the river, where it will be left to rot, a warning to those who would unmake the sacred order of family, state, and gods. You feel no pity. Not because he deserves it, none of them did, but because here, mercy was not a virtue. It was an indulgence Rome could ill afford. As you leave the campus, your steps take you past the Tullianum, Rome's most infamous holding cell. It is not a prison in the modern sense. There is no ward of long-suffering inmates, no rehabilitation, no petitions for clemency. Those consigned here are not meant to linger. They await death, quietly forgotten by the city above. You peer down through the iron grate. The stench is immediate. Stale blood, human waste, the sourness of unwashed flesh. In the darkness below, shapes stir. Men condemned for treason, for failed assassination plots, for imagined conspiracies. One day, perhaps soon, the order will come. They will be led out, one by one, and dispatched with little ceremony. Strangulation is the favored method in the Tullianum. Silent, effective. The floor already slick with old blood, the walls weeping with condensation. You wonder what thoughts fill the final hours of a man in such a place, whether hope persists or whether even memory flees. And still, the empire endures. You realize, as you pass through the forum once more, that justice in Rome is not about crime. It is about preserving the illusion of unassailable power. Every execution, every branding, every exile, every confiscation of goods is a message, not to the condemned, but to the living, a promise that Rome remains eternal, that dissent, disorder, or mere inconvenience will be repaid in flesh and fire. The city's stones are slick with centuries of such assurances. As evening falls, you hear again the rattle of chains. A procession of prisoners moves through the streets toward the Circus Maximus. Damnati ad ludos, the condemned to the games. Tomorrow they will face beasts, blades, fire, not for justice, not even for punishment, but for amusement. Their lives extinguished not to appease law or God, but boredom. And you realize that of all Rome's sentences, this is the one that endures most easily. The thirst for spectacle, for blood dressed as justice, for death repackaged as moral order. The empire will fall, its columns will crack, its temples will collapse. But that appetite, that lesson, that shadow stretches into every century to come. And as you return to your lodging, the lamps sputtering in the chill wind, you wonder how many of those ancient punishments still linger in quieter forms. In the hungry crowd, in the whispered accusation, in the punishment tailored not to fit the crime, but the fear of those who hold power. Mourning in Rome brings a kind of deceptive peace. The streets seem quieter, the air fresher, the city's thousand scars hidden for a brief moment beneath the sheen of dew and the soft haze of rising smoke from breakfast hearths. But you, having seen what churns beneath that calm surface, know better. Rome's punishments do not sleep, and its justice never forgets. Today, you find yourself near the office of the urban prefect. The prefectus urbi, a man whose authority within the city's walls rivals even that of the emperor's deputies. His is a peculiar role, a fusion of mayor, magistrate, and executioner. He handles disputes the Senate disdains, oversees the courts too trivial for imperial notice, and wields a private army of lictors and guards to enforce his verdicts. In theory, his justice is for the city's good. In practice, it is a tool of control, a lever for those wealthy and clever enough to manipulate it. You watch as a petitioner, a merchant from the port district, pleads his case before the prefect. A neighboring trader, it seems, accused him of price gouging, of hoarding grain in a time of scarcity. Whether it is true matters little. The mere accusation, delivered to the wrong ears, is often enough. The prefect, a lean man with sunken eyes and a face carved from indifference, listens in silence. His sentence is swift: confiscation of goods, a public flogging, and exile to one of the plague-ridden port towns of the southern coast. The crowd watching murmurs approval, not because they care for justice, but because someone else's downfall, however arbitrary, means a day's reprieve from their own. Punishment in Rome was a spectacle not only in the arena, but in the streets, in offices, in homes. A household slave caught stealing might be crucified at the crossroads, a place where the roads met and curses were thought to gather. You pass one such cross, leaning at a crooked angle, its occupant long gone but the bloodstains persistent in the stone below. The sight does not disturb the citizens who walk past, only draws a passing glance, as one might acknowledge a storm on the horizon, a reminder of Rome's implacable will. You think then of the peculiar punishments reserved for financial crimes, a category Rome despised not because it harmed the poor, but because it disrupted the economy that fed the city's massive appetite. Debtors might be sold into slavery, but speculators and moneylenders caught defrauding the state faced a punishment far older than crucifixion. Drowning in the Tiber, their hands bound behind their backs, a stone lashed to their necks, not for the crime itself, but for the offense to Rome's financial gods, to Mercury, to Moneta. Theft from the state was not mere larceny, but sacrilege. You reach the Milvian Bridge, the place of such drownings, where even now, the water lapping quietly at the piers seems to murmur of old sins. A plaque nearby marks a forgotten man, Lucius Sergius, condemned for diverting tax revenues during a military campaign. His name half erased, his fate recorded only in bureaucratic ledgers. The empire's punishment was always thorough. Not just death, but the erasure of memory, the confiscation of property, the shunning of family. Justice, for Rome, meant cleansing the offense and its residue alike. As you cross the bridge, the city's outskirts unfold before you, and you recall another punishment rarely spoken of, but all the more terrible for its discretion: exile without notification. A man accused of sedition might be summoned before the praetor and quietly informed that he must leave the city, not in a week or a day, but before nightfall. No public trial, no defense. His property forfeit, his household disbanded, his name struck from rolls. To remain would mean immediate execution. To leave was to become a non-person. It was a sentence feared more than death, for it was not martyrdom but slow obliteration. The exiled were not mourned. They were not remembered. Their statues were toppled, their accounts closed, their deeds unspoken. Families might keep silent shrines to them, hidden in cellars, though discovery of such would risk the same fate. At the city's edge, you see a line of figures, each marked by a scar or brand, waiting to pass through the gates. Freedmen, criminals expelled under penalty of death should they return. Some carry scraps of possessions. Others have nothing but the clothes on their backs. A few, you realize, are neither criminals nor enemies of the state, but men who once whispered too freely, wrote unwelcome verses, or failed to kneel at the emperor's procession. Rome's justice was exact but rarely fair. As evening falls, you find yourself again in the forum where the last judgments of the day are being passed. A group of men, sullen and beaten, stand before a magistrate. Their crime: refusing conscription during a time of need. Desertion and evasion of military duty were crimes Rome punished with extraordinary severity. In times of war, such men were flogged to death publicly, each blow a mark of collective outrage. In quieter years, they might be sent to labor in the quarries of Sicily or the salt mines of Ostia, where the work was its own execution. You watch as the sentence is given. The men are chained together, their families forced to watch as they're led away. There are no protests, no appeals. Rome's military machine demands bodies as tribute, and the law is the tool by which it collects them. The stars rise over the city's rooftops, and the scent of evening bread and olive oil mingles with the harsher odors of blood and sweat. The punishments you've witnessed today are neither extraordinary nor remarkable. They are the daily maintenance of empire, the dull, grinding machinery of order. Justice in Rome is not a single act but 1,000 small ones. A beating, a banishment, a brand, a drowning, each a thread in the vast, brutal tapestry that holds the city together. And as you make your way to your lodging, you understand that Rome's greatest punishment was not reserved for criminals, nor traitors, nor even defeated kings. It was the ordinary man's certainty that at any moment, for any reason without warning, the empire could reach out and crush him, and that no one would lift a finger to intervene. By the time the sun climbs the next morning, Rome's streets hum with a restless, predatory energy. The execution of the foreign king has been replaced by newer gossip, a provincial governor arrested, a senator denounced, a slave caught poisoning his master's wine. In Rome, scandal isn't a flaw of the system, it is the fuel that keeps it moving. And where scandal goes, punishment follows. You make your way toward the Basilica Julia, where trials for property disputes, debt, and public offenses are heard. The court is packed today, not because of any particularly notorious case, but because even minor verdicts can end in blood or ruin. Here, what begins as a squabble over inheritance can spiral into accusations of treason, blasphemy, or impiety. The lines between civil and criminal are as thin as the thread of a toga, and they fray quickly. You witness a case involving two brothers, one accusing the other of falsifying their father's will. The evidence is slight, a contested signature, a missing seal, but the stakes are everything. Property in Rome is life. Land, livestock, villas, and slaves, all signifiers of status and bulwarks against poverty. The elder brother is favored by the magistrate, who owes him debts of loyalty if not coin. The younger pleads, swears by the lares and penates, produces witnesses. None matter. The verdict is issued. The elder takes the estate. The younger, having dared to accuse and failed, is sentenced to infamia. Infamia is a punishment peculiar to Rome, a social and legal curse more devastating than mere exile or confiscation. It strips a man of his status as a citizen in the eyes of the law. He may no longer plead in court, serve in the military, inherit property, or marry by lawful ceremony. Worse, his word ceases to have legal weight. He cannot testify, cannot act as a guardian, cannot adopt. He remains alive, yet ceases to exist in the eyes of the state. You watch the condemned man's face fall, not in outrage but in disbelief. Death would be simpler. The forum empties slowly after the verdict, but your day's lessons are not yet done. In a nearby alley, two slaves are dragged before their master, accused of conspiring to escape. In earlier centuries, a slave's failed escape was punished with flogging, branding, or forced labor in the mines. By the High Empire, punishments grew crueler. The Lex Petronia limited the rights of masters to throw their slaves to wild beasts without cause, a limit often ignored. You see it happen now. The master demands one be crucified at the city's edge, the other sent to the arena. One will die slowly, nailed to timber in the dust and heat, his body left as warning to others. The other will fight untrained, unequipped, torn to pieces for the jeering pleasure of strangers. Their crime, daring to imagine freedom. You move on, passing a line of men waiting to pay their taxes at the aerarium, the state treasury. A middle-aged trader falls short of his owed sum. The official shrugs, makes a mark beside the man's name. That evening his home will be inventoried, his family's possessions seized. If the debt remains unsettled, he may be bound for debtor's servitude, sold, or worse, forced to labor in a state-owned quarry, where men with bad debts or minor crimes are worked until their bodies give out. It is this unceasing machinery of minor punishments, you realize, that truly defines Roman justice. The grand executions and arena spectacles draw the eye, but it is the fines, the beatings, the property seizures, and the stripping of legal identity that do the real work. These are the punishments that sustain the empire, death by 1,000 small degradations. Later that afternoon, you come upon the Tarpeian Rock. Its jagged face looms over the Forum, a place reserved in legend for traitors and those who betrayed the state. In the Republic's earlier, harder centuries, condemned men were hurled from its heights to shatter against the stones below. The practice has waned, but the place remains heavy with memory. A pair of men stand at its edge today, not for execution but as spectacle. Accused of theft from a temple treasury, they've been condemned to public humiliation before their exile. Their heads are shaved, their faces smeared with ash. Placards naming their crime hang around their necks, and their hands are bound. They are paraded past the shrines and temples they defiled, jeered by the crowds, spat upon by children. Later they will be put on a boat with a few coins and a sack of stale bread, forbidden to set foot again within any Roman province. Rome's justice has no interest in redemption, only in warning. As dusk falls, a final sentence is read in the Forum. A senator's freedman, accused of conspiring against his former master, is condemned to the mines. The Lex Cornelia allows for this. The man will labor deep in the earth, carving salt or lead from the walls of narrow tunnels, breathing dust and poison, dying slowly as his lungs turn to stone. No burial, no marker, just a body left in the darkness when it finally gives out. You return to your quarters as night wraps the city in a shroud of smoke and torchlight. The streets empty of merchants and magistrates, filled now with the sounds of distant cries, of those whipped in alleys, of families mourning, of prisoners shuffling toward their fate. Rome sleeps lightly, if at all. And you understand with a terrible clarity, Rome's punishments were never merely about guilt. They were about keeping a city of 1,000,000 restless souls quiet, about filling every alley, every threshold, every public square with the reminder that in this place, power is law and law is punishment. Not for fairness, not for virtue, but for the unbroken maintenance of fear. Another gray dawn, and the city rises with it. The Tiber carries the silt of last night's rain, slow and bloated beneath the bridges, and the air tastes of cold iron and wood smoke. Rome wakes not with joy, but with duty. The shops reopen, the priests sacrifice, the law courts prepare for their daily litany of grievances, and punishments, as inevitable as the rising sun, begin again. You find yourself walking toward the Vicus Celeratus, the wicked street, a name inherited from some long-forgotten atrocity, but now little more than a narrow, crooked lane of decrepit homes and stray dogs. Here, those of low station, those without patronage or protection, face the kind of justice that rarely makes records or public decrees. Petty theft is common, and in this place, property is guarded not with locks but with sharp eyes and sharper knives. You witness a woman caught lifting a loaf of bread from a vendor's stall. She is poor, her tunic ragged, a baby on her hip. The baker's response is swift. No trial, no magistrate. He strikes her with a wooden rod, knocking her to the ground. A crowd gathers not to intervene but to watch. The law allows for such reprisal in cases of petty theft caught in the act. He does not kill her. He does not have to. The humiliation is enough. She will be marked by the neighborhood now, an open target for abuse, her child likely taken into servitude within the month. Further along the street, you pass a gathering before a public latrine, not for scandal or amusement, but because a man has been found dead, slumped in the shadows, his throat cut. A petty informer, they say, one who sold out neighbors for coin, perhaps denounced a debtor too valuable to lose. No one investigates. No magistrate will waste parchment on his name. Rome's justice often leaves the unimportant to police themselves. In these dark corners, punishment is communal and without record. an unofficial justice as old as the hills. You move past the Temple of Saturn, where a group of prisoners are gathered in chains. It is the eve of the Saturnalia festival, a time when social roles invert and, paradoxically, punishments grow both rarer and stranger. During Saturnalia, condemned men might be pardoned as an act of spectacle. Others, however, are executed publicly to remind the city that beneath the laughter and mock rebellion, the law remains omnipotent. Today, a man accused of temple robbery is set for execution by flinging from the Tarpeian Rock, a rite rarely practiced now but revived for the occasion. The crowd cheers, eager for a death to christen the festival. The man's face is hidden by a sack, his body bound. He is led to the rock's edge, and a soldier shoves him with practiced disinterest. His body tumbles, striking the cliff face twice before vanishing into the rocky ditch below. The crowd howls its approval, and the city's mockery of freedom can proceed, secure in the knowledge that true order stands just behind the curtain. As the day stretches on, you follow a line of chained men and women to the campus Esquilinus, Rome's eastern necropolis. In life, the Esquiline had housed the empire's wealthiest. In death, its refuse. Here, the unclaimed dead, criminals, beggars, slaves, and debtors are discarded in mass graves, their bodies left to decay in shallow pits or be consumed by dogs and vultures. It is a punishment by omission. To deny a proper burial is to deny peace in the afterlife. Rome, pragmatic as ever, turns even the disposal of its unwanted into a cautionary tale. Among the dead you notice signs of punishment still clinging to their flesh. A branded face, a man whose ears have been cut away, a thief perhaps, a woman's mutilated hand, likely the price of sorcery or adultery. Even in death, their bodies bear witness to the justice meted out upon them. They are discarded as carrion, but each one is a lesson, a warning to those still breathing. Returning to the city proper, you glimpse a curious sight in the Forum Boarium, the cattle market turned informal court for disputes too minor for the basilicas. A merchant and a freedman stand before an impromptu jury of local traders. The freedman is accused of swindling in a dice game, his winnings taken through loaded knucklebones. There is no magistrate here, no written decree. The punishment is swift, immediate, and painful. His right hand is crushed between two stones, rendering it useless for any future deceit. The crowd nods its approval. No need for formal judgment when ancient customs suffice. You pause as dusk falls to watch a soldier flogged outside the Castra Praetoria. A centurion caught taking bribes, his betrayal a threat not to the people, but to the delicate web of power that holds the emperor's personal guard together. He is stripped of his belt, the mark of his rank, and beaten with vine sticks until the blood darkens the sand beneath him. He will live, but his career is over. Rome's justice shows no mercy to those who threaten its armed backbone. Night settles over the city, thick with smoke from the lamps and hearths. In some tavern corners, freedmen gamble their coin, glancing over their shoulders for informers. In the Subura, a slave whispers seditious verses to a lover, words that, if heard by the wrong ear, would mean crucifixion for one and scourging for the other. Rome's justice breathes in every shadow, hiding in the unspoken rules of streets and homes as much as in the edicts of marble temples. You've seen 1,000 deaths now, 1,000 punishments, some lawful, some not, but all bound by the unspoken covenant of power. Rome has no patience for reformers. It does not seek virtue. It needs only order, and punishment is the chain that binds its restless, treacherous city together. And as you stand beneath the arch of Septimius Severus, its carvings gleaming in the torchlight, you realize the most terrible thing of all. Rome does not merely punish. It teaches. It shapes. Every lash, every brand, every crucified body, every forgotten exile feeds a single unchanging lesson: obedience. And when obedience fails, the punishment that follows is never for the crime. It is for the defiance.